It begins with silence, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that gnaws, that stretches across the hours like a blade pressed against your skin. You sit in it, carrying the weight of every sideways glance, every whispered word spoken just low enough to remind you that you are not one of them. To them, you are fractured, unstable, a stray piece on a board they thought they already mastered. They see the tremor in your hand, the strange timing of your moves, the smile that does not match the room, and they call it madness. They call it weakness, and you let them. But deep in that silence, beneath the cruel laughter and the stares that strip you bare, something sharp begins to stir. You don't fight it, you feed it, because you've seen enough to know the truth. The line between madness and prophecy is nothing more than the patience to wait. They mock what they cannot read, and they fear what they cannot predict. Your steps confuse them, your rhythm unsettles them. They gather in their little circles, building walls of logic and rules, pretending they live in a world of certainty. Yet every rule they worship is brittle. Every wall they build trembles when you walk past. You are not blind to the cost. You feel the isolation like frost in your lungs. Nights stretch longer, darker. Even your reflection questions you, refusing to hold your gaze as though it too doubts the path you've chosen. You taste betrayal in the voices of those who once swore loyalty, the ones who smiled while quietly sharpening their knives. And still, you do not turn back, because you know betrayal is the only language of survival in a world built on masks. The moment you stopped begging for their understanding, the moment you let their laughter wash over you without defense, that was the moment the chaos began to answer your call. Every story the world tells itself begins with order, but you know better. You know that order is a fragile illusion, that beneath the surface of every empire, every family, every polished life is the trembling of a beast waiting to escape. You don't destroy order. You whisper to it. You lean into the cracks and let them widen. What they call madness is simply the refusal to worship their fragile design. What they call recklessness is strategy written in a language too ancient for them to read. And so you sit in that silence, appearing powerless, appearing broken, but inside you, the gears are turning. The storm is gathering. You do not need their approval, their permission, or their faith. You need only their doubt, because doubt is the doorway. While they smirk and shake their heads, you are already writing the next scene. They will call it madness again. They will dismiss you again. And yet when the silence finally shatters, weaponized laughter, when the first move collides with the second and the second folds into the third, they will realize the whisper they ignored was not weakness. It was warning. And by then, it will be far too late. They called it madness because they could not read the architecture behind your silence. To them, you were scattered, impulsive, nothing more than a broken compass spinning without direction. But you knew every crack in their order, every blind spot in their vision. Your choices looked like chaos because they were watching from the wrong angle. From where they stood, you were unraveling. From where you stood, you were drawing a map no one else could see. Each move you made was dismissed as error, yet each so-called mistake was placed with the precision of a stone in a hidden foundation. You collected ridicule the way an architect collects measurements. Their laughter became mortar, their doubt became steel, And while they celebrated their illusion of superiority, you were calculating quietly, like a storm sketching its own path across the sky. They believed they were witnessing collapse. In truth, they were witnessing construction. Madness is what they call the structure they cannot comprehend. To the uninitiated, a labyrinth is only confusion. But to the one who built it, every corridor, every dead end, every secret passage is intentional. That was you. Your life was the labyrinth, and their judgment was nothing but a blindfold. They could not understand that your chaos was not collapse, but camouflage. A veil designed to make them underestimate you, to look away at the exact moment they should have been paying attention. The betrayal you endured was not wasted. Every dagger they left in your back became a mark on the blueprint. You studied their cruelty as if it were scripture, etching each lesson deep into your bones. Pain is an unrelenting teacher, and you absorbed its language until it became the grammar of your strategy. They gave you scars, and in return, you gained coordinates. They gave you silence, and in return, you learned the frequency of whispers that no one else could hear. In ancient ruins, the carvings that survive are not the ornaments, but the load-bearing walls. So too with you. The parts of you they tried to break became the strongest pillars. They thought they were dismantling you, but every fracture only revealed another layer of design. The architecture of your soul, called madness, was not fragile. It was evolving, expanding, reaching into spaces no one else dared to measure. You did not rush. That was your quiet defiance. They expected recklessness, a self-destruction that would prove them right. Instead, you let time be your accomplice. Every insult, every dismissal, every mocking glance was filed away like data, assembled into patterns invisible to ordinary minds. They mistook your stillness for surrender. They never realized stillness was the most dangerous movement of all. And so the architecture grew unseen but inevitable, until even you could feel the weight of it pressing beneath your skin. A design too vast to be explained, too deliberate to be dismissed, too dangerous to remain hidden forever. They called it madness because it terrified them to think it might be something else, intelligence sharpened beyond recognition, strategy disguised as chaos, prophecy written in fractures. And deep inside, you always knew the truth. Madness was never the absence of order. It was the mask you wore while building a cathedral no one else believed could stand. They never understood you, but they never stopped watching. Their eyes clung to your every move, not out of respect, but out of a hunger to see you fall. They dressed their fascination as mockery, their fear as laughter, their obsession as disgust. Every insult they hurled was really a prayer that you would fail, because if your chaos held meaning, then their order was nothing but an illusion. They wanted to believe you were insane, because that belief kept them safe. Yet still, they could not look away. You became their forbidden spectacle, the one they ridiculed, but secretly studied. The whispers in corridors, the smirks exchanged behind your back, the heavy silence that filled the room when you entered. It was all theater, and they were your audience. They wanted to be the judges of your downfall, yet every second they spent watching became an admission of their powerlessness. They waited for the collapse that never came. They counted the seconds until your madness consumed itself. But time betrayed them. because instead of burning out, your fire only grew sharper, more precise, as if each insult fed the storm. They laughed at you, but their laughter trembled. They tried to name your actions reckless, but the cadence of your moves struck chords too deliberate to ignore. They called it chaos, but it moved with rhythm. They said it was chance, but it unfolded like scripture. They began to sense something ancient in the way your path cut through theirs, something that smelled of inevitability, as if the universe itself leaned closer to watch you play. What they mistook for folly began to feel like prophecy. And here lies the cruel truth. Even your enemies craved your presence. You were their distraction, their shadow, their secret obsession. Without you, their stage was empty. Without you, their victories felt hollow. They needed you, not as an equal, but as the dark mirror that reflected their hidden fears. They pretended to despise your performance, but in the silence of their rooms, they replayed it in their minds, wondering if they had missed the pattern. Because deep down, they knew the joke was never on you, it was on them. You let them believe they were laughing. You let them believe they were in control. But every sneer, every whisper, every eye locked on you became a thread in your design. You had turned their ridicule into currency, their judgment into fuel, their gaze into chains binding them to you. They thought they were watching you drown, but all the while, it was you dragging them into the deep. They wanted to see a clown stumble. Instead, they witnessed the architect of their own undoing. And so, the world became your unwilling congregation, seated in the dark, waiting for your next move. You stood at the center of their judgment, cloaked in their disbelief, and with every step forward you rewrote the script they thought they controlled. To them, you were a spectacle. To you, they were already an audience trapped inside your theater, unable to leave, unable to resist, unable to deny the truth that pressed against their minds like a whisper in the dark. Madness was never weakness. Madness was power wearing a mask. At first, nothing made sense. Your steps looked scattered, like fragments of a broken mirror scattered across a cold floor. Every move was met with ridicule. Every silence mistaken for weakness. Every risk you took cataloged as proof of your unraveling. They watched you stumble. They laughed when you hesitated. They wrote you off as a body spiraling into the void. And you let them. You let them believe the story they wanted to see, because their blindness was part of the design. They thought they were studying your failure. They never realized you were studying their patterns. Then, without warning, the fragments began to align. What seemed like chaos to them began to hum with a rhythm only you could hear. It was not madness, but mathematics hidden in shadows, the geometry of survival written in pain and defiance. The puzzle clicked into place like a lock surrendering to its true key. And in that instant, the world that mocked you froze. The silence was no longer yours. It belonged to them. Their laughter died in their throats, and their eyes widened with the dreadful awareness that they had mistaken camouflage for collapse. The air around you shifted. Every misstep they cataloged was revealed to be a move in a sequence they could not comprehend. They remembered the moments they dismissed as meaningless, the words you did not say, the risks you seemed to mishandle, the choices that looked suicidal. But now they understood those were not cracks in your armor. They were traps. Every failure they mocked was a thread woven into the snare that now closed around them. And as realization burned into their skin, they understood the most terrifying truth of all. The stage they believed you had stumbled upon was one you built for them. Power is not given, it is revealed. And when your puzzle clicked into place, you became the mirror they could not bear to look at. They saw themselves exposed, fragile, predictable, hollow in their certainty. They had relied on rules, on reason, on the fragile illusion of control. You had relied on silence, patience, and the ancient knowledge that chaos is only chaos to those without vision. To you, it was architecture. To them, it was revelation that arrived too late. Now every shadow they dismissed has weight. Every silence they mocked now carries thunder. And in their trembling, you recognize something you have never seen before. Fear not of what you did, but of what you were always capable of doing. The puzzle did not just click for you, it clicked for them, too. And once they saw the design hidden inside the madness, they could never unsee it. Their betrayal of you, their laughter, their dismissal. It all collapsed under the weight of a single truth. You were never losing. You were arranging the board, waiting for the moment when the final piece slid into place. And now it has. They laughed because they thought you were harmless. They laughed because it was easier than admitting they didn't understand you. In their eyes, you were a broken figure, stumbling through shadows, a fool trapped in the labyrinth of your own delusions. Every whisper, every smirk, every sharpened word was a stone thrown at the mask you wore. They mistook silence for weakness. They mistook your restraint for defeat, and so they laughed, like hyenas circling a lion they believed was too wounded to rise. But beneath the noise, you were listening. You cataloged every insult, every betrayal, every moment they turned your name into their entertainment. You memorized the cadence of their cruelty, the way they mocked what they couldn't comprehend. Their laughter became a map, guiding you to their blind spots, their fragile assumptions, their desperate need for control. You knew the truth they refused to see. The louder they mocked, the more terrified they were of the possibility that you were not broken at all. Because monsters know when another predator is in the room, and in their laughter was fear disguised as ridicule. They called you insane because they needed the label to protect themselves from the mirror you held up to their faces. You were the anomaly in their carefully built order, the fracture in their illusion of superiority. They had to convince themselves you were beneath them, or else admit that they were never above you in the first place. And now, the laughter has gone quiet. The stage they once filled with mockery has collapsed under its own weight. Their voices, once thunderous, have thinned into silence, as if even sound itself dares not linger in your presence. You watch their eyes shift when they meet yours, that fleeting tremor in their gaze revealing the truth they cannot conceal. They know the fool they mocked has become the shadow they cannot predict, the presence that will not kneel. It is a cruel kind of justice, isn't it? The same mouths that once spat venom now choke on their own breath when you enter the room. Their mockery has become their undoing, for every laugh was a confession of fear, a confession of envy, a confession that they saw something in you they could not crush. You were their test, and they failed it. The monsters who laughed are no longer laughing. Their masks are cracking, their power dissolving into the same chaos they once accused you of carrying. They see now that you are not the fool. You are the fire beneath the ashes, the storm hidden in the calm. What they called madness was vision. What they mocked as weakness was patience sharpening itself into a weapon. They do not sleep easily anymore, because they have learned what the dark truly holds. They were wrong about you. You are not their joke. You are the silence that haunts them after the laughter dies. You are the shadow standing at the edge of their dreams. And it is not you who fears the monsters. It is the monsters who fear you. You remember when they told you that you were finished, when they whispered behind closed doors that your fire had gone out, that your steps had no direction, that you were nothing more than noise in the wind. They looked at you with condescension, with the smugness of those who believe they've already won, and you let them. You let their words drip like venom into the air. Let them build their castles of certainty on ground you already knew was crumbling. Because silence is sharper than shouting. Because weakness, when worn like a mask, can be mistaken for defeat. But the silence was never empty. It was a forge. Every insult, every betrayal, every hand that pushed you down became molten iron, reshaped in your hidden fire. You learned to turn humiliation into heat, rejection into rhythm, pain into prophecy. Where they saw a body bent, a spirit broken, what they could not see was the design unfolding in the shadows. You were not eroding, you were condensing. Power was gathering around you like a storm that refuses to announce itself until the lightning is already splitting the sky. The first strike is always disbelief. They laughed when you first stood taller, as though it was an accident, as though your rise was just another fluke. But the second strike is terror, because when the storm does not pass, when the thunder keeps rolling, when the lightning does not fade but grows brighter, something inside them begins to fracture. They realize the nightmare. You are not stumbling upward. You are ascending with intention. This is the birth of power, not in the shallow way they understand it, not in crowns or titles or applause. Power is born in the moment your silence terrifies them more than your voice, when your presence bends the air, when your very existence forces them to look at their own weakness and call it order. You become the axis around which their illusions collapse. Their laughter dies in their throats, because they finally see what you always knew, that you were not waiting for permission. You were waiting for inevitability. And inevitability has no mercy. It does not ask if they are ready. It does not care for their defenses, their alliances, their fragile architecture of control. It comes like fire through dry grass, unstoppable, consuming, reshaping. You do not beg to enter their halls. You bring them down with the weight of your steps. The same walls that kept you out now serve as rubble beneath your feet. What they feared as madness was the rehearsal of your rebirth. What they dismissed as weakness was the architecture of your return. And now, as you rise, the world tilts. They feel it in their chests, in the marrow of their bones, the sudden awareness that they are no longer above you, that they never truly were. You are not the echo of what they destroyed. You are the consequence of what they unleashed. And consequences cannot be silenced. They called it madness because they could not read it. They looked into your eyes and saw storms they could not chart, movements they could not predict, choices that seemed suicidal. They mistook silence for emptiness, hesitation for fear, and chaos for collapse. But beneath every jagged line, every fractured step, there was intention. Madness was never a condition. It was camouflage, the mask you wore so convincingly that even you began to wonder if it was eating you alive. Yet behind that mask, in the hidden corridors of your mind, you were carving paths no one else dared to walk. You let them laugh. You let them call you reckless, unstable, broken, because ridicule is the softest prison, and you knew it would keep them blind. You fed them illusions like poisoned bread, small displays of disorder, tiny acts of ruin, enough to keep them sure of their superiority. But while they watched your staged collapse, you were studying their steps, their patterns, their weaknesses. Every insult became a signal. Every dismissal became a gift. They thought they were stripping you of power when, in truth, they were emptying their own hands into yours. Madness was your smoke screen, a labyrinth of shadows and fractured mirrors, where their arrogance became their leash. You allowed yourself to be underestimated because the underestimated are never guarded against. You hid the blade behind the laughter. You buried the plan beneath the ashes. They thought you were burning, but you were only waiting for the wind. And when it came, the fire they mocked revealed itself as architecture, not destruction. Design. The betrayal cuts deepest when it comes not from enemies, but from those who swore they understood you, friends who mistook your silence for surrender, allies who traded loyalty for convenience. They, too, fell for the mask, and their departure only sharpened your solitude into something lethal. You learned to let go of their absence, because absence is its own kind of ally. It forces the soul to grow claws. In their betrayal, you were purified. In their departure, you were refined. The old world has always feared masks. Ancient warriors painted their faces not to conceal, but to terrify. Shamans wore animal skins to cross the threshold between the seen and unseen. You understood that truth instinctively, that the mask is not weakness, but weapon. They thought they were seeing the real you when they mocked your madness. But what they saw was the skin of a predator wrapped in misdirection, a theater of chaos concealing the calmest hands. And now, as the veil thins, they see it. The game is over. The mask of madness slides away, not with apology, but with revelation. The silence they mistook for weakness becomes the echo that deafens them. The chaos they mocked becomes the map that led you here. You never lost yourself. You concealed yourself. You never wandered. You waited. They mistook the mask for your face. But tonight, they meet the one who wore it. And that truth terrifies them more than any madness ever could. They thought you were the monster. That was easier for them. Simpler to cage you inside a story where you were the threat, the aberration, the mistake of nature that must be controlled. But monsters are predictable. Monsters howl, destroy, consume, and then burn out. You did not burn. You endured. And in that endurance, in that quiet defiance, you became something far worse to them than a beast could ever be. You became the sleepless question at the edge of their minds, the shadow they cannot measure, the silence that answers back when they think they've silenced you. They called you reckless when you broke their rules, insane when you refused their script. They laughed at the cracks in your armor, not realizing those cracks were carved on purpose, like openings in a labyrinth meant to lure them deeper. They mistook your restraint for weakness, your pauses for indecision, your scars for wounds that never healed. And now they see the truth too late. Every wound was a map, every hesitation a trap, every fragment of your soul, called madness a design sharper than their order. You were never trying to become their monster. You were sculpting yourself into the thing monsters dread, the mind that sees them fully, without fear, without illusion. In the silence of night, their power trembles, because power built on domination needs obedience to survive, and you are proof that obedience was never inevitable. Your presence rewrites their certainty. Your refusal turns their commands into echoes that never land. They built their world on the belief that you were beneath them. But when the floor collapses, they are the ones falling, and you are the void swallowing them whole. You do not roar. You do not rage. Your power is colder, sharper, the kind that cannot be measured by noise. It is the power of the unanswered riddle, the sealed book, the locked door that dares them to open it and face what waits inside. Monsters thrive in chaos, but you are the stillness after the storm, the silence that makes them realize the storm was never theirs to command. And in that silence, their nightmares grow teeth. They whisper about you now the way ancient cities whispered about omens. Fear mixed with awe, denial masking recognition. Because somewhere inside, they know you dismantled their illusions using nothing but the very things they mocked you for. Your scars became your armor. Your solitude became your fortress. Your refusal to bow became the signal that spread like fire through the shadows. They called you mad for resisting. Now they call you dangerous because you endured. You are not the beast hiding under their beds. You are the weight pressing on their chest when they close their eyes. You are the reminder that control was never absolute. That fear can cut both ways, that the very order they built can crumble in silence without a scream. You are not their monster. You are what keeps their monsters awake, staring into the dark, praying for dawn that never comes.